Don't scream. It's just a fragment. That's what my husband's cousin Harold whispered to me that night when I was only 15. And I had seen something no girl should ever have to see. Something that would haunt me for the rest of my life, and imprison me in a prison of silence and shame. My name is Kalista Davis. I'm 79 years old now, and most people around here know me as the quiet widow who tends her small garden and goes to church every Sunday morning. But what they don't know is the terrible secret I've carried in my heart for over 60 years about Cousin Harold and the two secrets he forced me to keep. I'm sitting here in my little garden in Ohio, where I've found peace for the past 40 years. The roses are blooming, and the afternoon sun feels warm on my weathered hands. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still smell that suffocating scent of lilies mixed with embalming fluid. I can still hear Harold's voice, cold and calculating, telling me things that would change my life forever. Let me take you back to 1961, to a small town in Corbin, Kentucky, where everybody knew everybody, and secrets were supposed to stay buried. I was the seventh child out of 8 in a family so poor that we counted pennies for bread. My daddy worked double shifts at the coal mine, and my mama took in washing from the wealthier families in town. That's when Harold entered our lives like a dark angel promising salvation. He was my daddy's cousin, 43 years old, and the only funeral director within 3 counties. Harold owned the biggest Victorian house in town, right next to his funeral home, and he had more money than most folks had ever seen. I remember the first time I really looked at Harold. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that never seemed to see sunlight, and hands that were always cold when he touched you. His eyes were the strangest shade of gray, almost colorless. And when he smiled, it never reached those eyes. When he looked at me, I felt like a piece of meat being examined for quality. The conversations between my parents started happening behind closed doors, but our house was so small that whispers carried. I heard my mama talking about opportunities and Harold's generous offer. She kept talking about how Harold could give me things they never could, how I'd never have to worry about money or going hungry again. I felt like a prize cow being discussed at auction. Nobody asked me what I wanted. When Mama sat me down to explain about the engagement, she acted like she was giving me the greatest gift in the world. "Kalista, honey," she said, smoothing down my hair. "Harold is offering you a chance at a real life. A life with pretty dresses and a big house and respect in this town." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I'd rather starve than marry a man who made my flesh crawl. But I was 15. And in 1961, 15-year-old girls didn't have voices that mattered. The wedding was planned for October, just 2 months after my 16th birthday. Harold began visiting more frequently, always bringing gifts. But the gifts came with expectations. During walks, Harold would tell me things about marriage that made my stomach turn, describing what husbands and wives did together in terms so clinical and cold. "You're going to be my wife, Kalista," he'd say, stopping to look at me with those colorless eyes. "That means you belong to me in every way. Body, mind, and soul." The wedding day arrived like a funeral procession. I stood wearing Mama's yellowed wedding dress, my hands shaking so bad that my sister had to help me with the buttons. When Harold kissed me to seal our marriage, his lips were as cold as his hands. Harold's house was even more imposing up close. Everything smelled like flowers and chemicals from the funeral home next door. That first night, Harold showed me to what would be our bedroom. When I came out of the bathroom in the nightgown he'd laid out, Harold was waiting. Instead of what I'd been dreading, Harold began to talk. He told me about his first secret, about his physical abnormality. Where other men had one, he had two. It was a condition he'd hidden his entire adult life. "You're the only person who will ever know this about me, Kalista," he said, his gray eyes boring into mine. "This secret dies with us. If you ever tell anyone, I will make sure your family pays the price." That night set the tone for our entire marriage. I wasn't Harold's wife so much as I was his secret keeper. Harold controlled everything about my life. What I wore, what I ate, who I could talk to, where I could go. Christmas of that first year brought a discovery that would change everything. Harold had gone to Louisville, leaving me alone for 3 days. I decided to explore the parts of the house that Harold had kept off limits. The basement was where Harold did his prep work, and I'd been told it was too dangerous. What I found down there still gives me nightmares. Hidden behind a false wall, Harold had created a second room filled with glass jars lined up on shelves. Each jar contained something that had once been part of a human being, floating in a clear preservative. But it was the journals that truly horrified me. Harold kept meticulous records of everything he'd taken from which body, and when. Hearts, fingers, sections of skin with tattoos, even eyes from people he found attractive. He wrote about each piece like it was a treasure. I ran upstairs and vomited until there was nothing left. I was trapped in a house with a man who collected pieces of dead people like other men collected stamps, and I was the only person in the world who knew the truth about Harold Whitman. When Harold returned, he knew immediately that something had changed. "You went downstairs, didn't you?" he said quietly. He explained it all so calmly. How he'd started taking small things from bodies, how it had grown into something more elaborate. "It's not hurting anyone, Kalista. They're dead. I can preserve them. Keep them beautiful forever." "It's sick, Harold. What you're doing to those people is evil." His face changed, the mask sliding away. "But you're going to keep this secret just like you keep the other one. Because if you don't, I'll make sure your family understands exactly what kind of ungrateful little wife they raised." Harold's behavior began to change after I discovered his museum. He became more erratic, spending hours down there, talking to his collection like they were old friends. He started looking at me differently, like he was studying me the same way he studied his anatomy books. My suspicions were confirmed on a rainy night in March. I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice, weak and pleading, coming from the basement. A living voice. Harold was talking to someone, his voice calm and reassuring, but the other voice was begging, crying, asking to be let go. By dawn, the pleading voice had stopped altogether. Harold came upstairs whistling softly, washed his hands, and made coffee like any other morning. 3 days later, the body of a traveling salesman was found in a motel room. Harold handled the burial. I watched him console the man's widow while I knew he'd murdered her husband. I began to plan more carefully. Dr. Patterson was the town's physician, a man with a reputation for discretion. If anyone might believe me, it would be him. I finally approached him after church, claiming I needed to discuss some problems privately. Sitting in Dr. Patterson's office, I told him about Harold's strange behavior, the sounds from the basement, the jars. Dr. Patterson listened, his face growing more concerned. When I described the night I'd heard the living voice, he stood up and walked to his window. "Mrs. Whitman, these are very serious accusations. If what you're telling me is true, we need to contact the state authorities immediately." Dr. Patterson agreed to make discreet inquiries, but also warned me that if Harold was as dangerous as I believed, I needed to be prepared to leave town quickly. Harold sensed the change in me immediately. He began watching me more closely, questioning my activities. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later when Harold found my hidden escape fund. "Going somewhere, my dear?" he asked, holding up the envelope containing my savings. "I know you've been talking to people about me, Kalista, but you seem to have forgotten something important. You belong to me. You've seen things that make you just as guilty as I am." But Dr. Patterson had contacted the state medical examiner's office, raising questions about suspicious death certificates. What he found was a pattern of deaths wherever Harold had worked. The night I tried to leave, Dr. Patterson was waiting with 2 state investigators. They had a warrant to search Harold's basement. But Harold sensed the danger. When I didn't return home, he came to Dr. Patterson's house demanding I come with him. When Dr. Patterson refused, Harold became violent. That's when Dr. Patterson's gun went off. Harold died on the front porch, his last words about how I belonged to him and his secrets would follow me to my grave. The investigation revealed Harold's basement museum exactly as I'd described. 23 jars containing pieces of different people, along with detailed journals. But they found worse. A second hidden room contained the bodies of 7 people, all showing signs of trauma. Harold had been keeping victims alive for his experiments. I had to testify, reliving every detail in front of the victims' families. Some looked at me with sympathy. Others wondered how I could have lived with Harold without knowing everything. After the inquest, I moved to Ohio, changing my name and starting over. I found work as a seamstress and tried to build a life based on honesty. I married Robert Davis, a good man who knew my past but loved me anyway. But Harold's story wasn't finished. In 1984, I received a letter from Kentucky. During renovation of the old house, workers found another hidden room with 12 more bodies and journals, detailing Harold's correspondence with others who shared his interests. Harold hadn't been working alone. The FBI investigation led to arrests in 6 states. Men in morgues and funeral homes, all connected by their obsession with death. Harold had been one of the worst, but not unique. Learning about Harold's network brought back nightmares, but also relief. For 20 years, I'd carried guilt for not speaking up sooner. Understanding that Harold was part of something much larger helped me realize there was nothing a frightened 16-year-old could have done. Now I'm 79, telling this story because I need people to understand something about secrets and silence. The burden of keeping Harold's secrets almost destroyed me. But courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you find when you get tired of being afraid. I'm telling this because somewhere there might be another young person trapped like I was. Someone told they're complicit, just as guilty as their controller. I want them to know, you can survive. You can escape. You can start over and build a life based on truth. Sometimes people ask if I regret marrying Harold. I can't regret something that taught me about my own strength. I survived Harold Whitman. I outlived him by 40 years and counting. Harold thought his secrets would be my prison forever. But here I am, telling the world about his basement museum. The secrets that were supposed to destroy me became the foundation of my freedom. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'll spend it in the sunlight, remembering that even the darkest places can't hold you forever if you keep looking for the light.